Good day. Coming to you on the 11th of March 2024 on the Gregorian calendar. And I just want to share some things with you. Today is the second day of the moon cycle, so it's still near the beginning of the month. And I just want to share with you something that's on my heart. This has to do with guardianship. I'm going to do a series on guardianship. I hope to make it enlightening, something that you can use and apply to your life, something that is actually universal because it has to do with international law, it has to do with civics, it has to do with knowing who we are. So I am indigenous here to these lands known as United States of America. And it's part of my responsibility to help educate people about what's happening in the world today, particularly as it relates to the people who are indigenous to this land and as it relates to really the world, because the world is looking on to see how we are responding to some of these things that are going on today. So, what stands out for me is what's happening with Wendy Williams being, she's quote unquote receiving care. All right. So I've posted on this before, but I want to try to do it in a series where I can uh, use this whole principle of guardianship and explain to people what I think is happening, and hopefully the remedy will be in there because everyone will be on the same page. And when it relates to this thing, there is a right way and there is a wrong way, and it's based in best practices for care here. It's also based in law. And although the various quote unquote states have rights, they also, the people who work for the states have responsibilities. And so let me just start out with a few questions. It'll help you focus your attention on what I want you to gather from my presentation. So we call them pre-questions. I'll ask at the beginning and then kind of make note. Maybe you could jot down your answer to the questions and then check to see if you have the same answer at the end. Okay, let's see. I think I'll ask 6 questions today. The first one is true or false? True or false? There's no difference in legal competence and mental health competence. Let me just rephrase the question a little bit. There's no difference between someone saying you're competent mentally and you're competent legally. So, in two different realms, let's say in a health evaluation, are you, competent to work, competent to stand trial? These, I mean, just regular everyday activities, competent, able to take care of your children, right? Is that the same thing as legal competence? Whereas a judge or an attorney would be making an argument of you being competent or not. There's no real difference. Like one is based on the other. There's no real difference. Okay. True or false? The second one is true or false as well. Parental rights can be terminated at any time. Parental rights can be terminated at any time in the United States. True or false? Parental rights can be terminated at any time. True or false? Three, psychosocial assessment and psychological assessment are the same thing. True or false? A psychological assessment and a psychosocial assessment, they're the same thing. True or false? Okay. Number 4, African American persons have a right to their family. African American persons have a right to communicate with their family. African American persons have the right to communicate with their family. Okay. Number 5, the question is, what do you think a label is? What is a label? What is a label as it relates to persons? What is a label? Number 6, what is one con of a label as it relates to pros and cons? What is one negative, one con of a label? And I said that I had 6 questions, but I just thought of a 7th question. The 7th question is, what is the difference between persons and people? What is the difference between persons and people? Okay. Now, let me speak to these matters, and I hope that it helps gain some understanding. So, first of all, let me start off by here. Every state that is within the United States has its own jurisdiction and corporate rules. But overseeing those, because it works like this, you have the county, you have the state, except in the District of Columbia, you have wards, but you have the county, the state, then you have the United States. Now, underneath that, you have the de jure counting of the people, and then you have well, originally it was republic that were not corporated, right? And they're still there. And then you have the United States of America, which is a trust, which is different than the corporate US. And just to give some evidence of what I'm saying to be true, look at your postal trucks. You will notice that your postal trucks do not have license plates. And that is because that they travel based on the treaty agreements for the trust. They're on the land. They're not technically in on this on the in the Sea of Commerce, although that is what they do as well. They're in more than one jurisdiction. But as far as them traveling from location to location, it's based on the trust on the land. Okay, so with that being said, um, I lost my train of thought that quick. With that being said, with the different jurisdictions, when someone is born, they get a record of their being born, but they also birth certificates, and we operate in commerce, and we are given estates when we are first born and birthed. Our commercial entity is birthed into the world, and so we go about life, and um, we are not really aware of the jurisdictions that we're in. Okay, so what happens now from a legal standpoint is we're not actually considered to be competent, because legally competent. We're not considered to be legally competent because we actually accept a corporate fictitious identity as ourselves. Now, many people don't know that and they come into a situation of where they would read and come to a knowledge and understanding of this fictitious realm that exists. So it's not something that's taught to people in school when it comes to taught to the health professionals. Because if you think about it, it's the health professionals in the hospitals that first create, they give the information, your mother and the health professionals help create this information that's put out into the sea of commerce. But they're not trained that that's what they're doing. Yes, they are trained to gather certain information in a proper way with a blue pen, but they're not told why the pen needs to be blue versus red or black or purple. Okay. So, no sense getting mad at them. And then your social worker, usually there's a social worker at the hospital in case, well, there's many reasons for social workers. They really um, are the ethical, that profession more than the others, in my opinion, are taught ethics just from working with other professionals and knowing a little bit about their training. Social workers are the most trained, have received the most training on ethical standards, and in a lot of ways balance things out if they are true to what they learn in school, which is sometimes different than the requirement from their supervisor at a job. Because with the licensing piece comes a diminishing of the rights, and they don't know because they were not taught this part of civics and this part of the law. So there many times the people who went to social work school, they want to help, they want to make a difference, and they learn how to do that. And then also in their ethics training, they get tools on how to stand up for the rights that they were the not the rights, the right thing that they were taught along the way, which is development, the life cycle, moral stages of development, physical stages of development. Because a lot of times what is taught in school, it actually will later then that information conflicts with what is asked of them in the job. But they don't know that when they go through school, right? And the licensing process for social workers is a relatively new thing. It's only been over, I would say, the last 15 or 16 years that social workers have been licensed. So they start out the profession, the base, the root of the profession is helping increase the level of functioning in all settings, whether it be an one man, one woman, right, that needs to improve their level of functioning, or it be a family, and I use that word on purpose, family. It has to do with kind of a bondage, servitude state. Kin would be a better word. However, you're trained to work with the family. Okay. So, community, there could be many specialties when it comes to social work. You can have a focus on a smaller group helping individuals and people, or you can focus on creating systems and maintaining systems, changing systems, strategic change, strategic development. So only about, I would say, 1/10 or so, the last I know about, I haven't done the research lately, but I know from what I observed, let's say a class of 100, maybe 10 people would be focused solely on the larger system, but you all get the base information is the same, but then you might have a specialty and then you'll specialize further, whether it be displaced populations and homelessness, or mental health, or family. Um, so every school is different, and so that might influence your learning as well. However, there is a council on social work education, and they make sure that the standards at the school are in line with the national standards. Now, how that impacts the whole field is because of globalization. Certain states will make their licensing such that if you want a decent paying job, you will get a license. If you um, want to get a lot of experience in the field, you're going to want to get a license. And the way it has happened at the state level is the state level have really made statutes and codes that are unconstitutional. So, for instance, if you apply for a state license to be a social worker, then it could be the case at whatever state that now you're also making a commitment. I won't protest. I won't say anything that is against what the state wants for the citizens of the state. And I'm not talking about just at the job that you've agreed to or when you're wearing the hat of a licensed professional. I'm talking about at all ever. That is unconstitutional. All right. And this also plays into the reason why so many people are silent about the injustice and atrocities that are being done to the young people when it comes to the mutilation during their adolescent years and their minds are not developed. And this is done behind the backs of the parents many times, which is a cheat of the rights of a parent because this is listen here because in many states parental rights are not to be arbitrarily taken away. There should be, based on federal processes, there needs to be a hearing, there needs to be an appeal, there needs to be a um, a recognition where it's demonstrated that the man or woman who's caring for the child that they thought, well, they do have responsibility to care for the child legally. They have the responsibility to care for the child. And so when there are things that are done outside of the parent's presence to change the child's biology, their physiology, it is to be known to the parent. And this is what we call ethical dilemmas because there are also restraints on what a parent is to know when it comes to mental health services. And so it's important for mental health professionals to know what is legally acceptable in law so they can stand for the right thing and not be used to genocide the people, right? And then it's also important that legal authorities know how they even are able to really manipulate and use or help whichever one they're trying to do, how they get that foothold into one's life. Why? Because the mental health professional or social worker or nurse, whoever it may be, right? They made promises to that child, man, woman, made promises. I won't tell you information. You can trust me. You know, I only way I would tell it is that there's a harm to you, a threat of harm or danger. That's the only way I would share it. It's called HIPAA, right? And if I'm concerned about your health, I will share. So what happens is that the professional builds a relationship with the child. Usually it's a child that's vulnerable, right? And then the child will share, I'm having these thoughts or feelings. Okay. You don't just go run and tell that. But then you have someone from another profession in the health field, maybe a doctor or a nurse or an attorney. They have decided without any training in human development that it's perfectly okay if we start giving you pills to change your development. We start, and this could be a 15-year-old, 14-year-old, right? We're going to give you pills because you feel like you're a man, but you're not a man, or you feel like you're really a woman on the inside, but you're not a woman. See, there was a day and a time when this was an identity crisis, but now today it's considered a way or a medical intervention, but it conflicts with the standard of do no harm. That is the first standard: do no harm. So, um, I'm saying this so people can understand that there's more than one jurisdiction, that the attorney is not concerned about your physical health, and then the ones who are to be concerned about your physical health and development are not necessarily educated in the legal processes. And so then there's a gap here where people don't know what's going on, and it's confusion. And then some people who are in these roles of attorney or legal, they feel like, well, this is legally correct or right. Well, no, because the social worker, the mental health professional that's there linking the two realms, they're in both realms. Because if they only were in the fictitious realm, then how can they talk to the living being to know what's going on in their mind? So this is too how this conversation plays in with guardianship, because some people would have it say, well, the courts can treat you however you want because you are living under this label of being a citizen that is under the power of attorney of whatever state that your corporate person was born into, was birthed into, birthed like a ship. So let's just say the state was Maryland, and then you moved to the district, right? Your estate was created based on the land at Maryland, right? But then through the county and the state processes, there's a power of attorney that people don't talk about for you at Maryland. And then there's agreements between the states as you go to be, now this is your option, you don't know this, but to be resident citizen from one to another. All right. So these are things that we're not taught about. We're not taught, and we have difficulties because we don't know. And so that's why I'm here today, to talk about these things from the ground up, because there'll be people in these roles, let's say attorney general or attorney, who will have these misconceptions about what's really happening because they're not trained on the law. They know legal processes. Some of them, some of them don't even know proper legal processes. I know this because I've had to get consultations from someone else that will come and say, "Is it just me, or this doesn't make sense?" And they'll share their legal opinion from an expert perspective, as far as being um, a professor or whatever have you. And I've even been in situations where the quote unquote judge, which would more like be a magistrate, but they might not stay up on all the codes that are in their jurisdiction. I've been in that situation where I've had to advocate, hey, there was a new law that came out. And when I say law, I mean in their legal system, right? Because it's a matrix and a matrix and a matrix. And I've said to the attorney, hey, attorney, this law came out. I'm able to get, because this child is in the care of the state, and I'm caring for the child based on that arrangement, right? It's my responsibility. I'm in a role where I'm responsible for the child's well-being as if I'm their parent on certain matters, because their biological parent probably still had parental rights, but they just didn't meet whatever criteria for caring for the child. So now the state is coming in. The state doesn't just one day say, "Oh, you're dropping the ball, so now we're going to take your child." No. And even when the child does come into the care of the state, it does not terminate the rights of the parent. The parent still, this is due process. And what I'm hearing now is that many states do not have due process. When you have due process, then the system makes more sense. It really does. And I just think that what has happened is it's been common practice to not use best practice at the state level. That's the best way I can say, because I have worked in a jurisdiction, even though, yes, it's corporate fictions. You're going in and out of corporate fictions, but at least they're sticking to due process. And that way, it's not going to be as much. It's not going to be as much chaos. It actually, you wouldn't even really notice that there's a problem if people would just stick to the rules, if they would just be compliant with the rules. Because look at it, it's 2024, and the United States of America has been getting on for some time now, right? And with that said, if they're moving along and people they're not really fully complaining about some things, right? So that must be something is working for them. But now things are not working and it's breaking down, right? So um, I think that compliance is a big thing. Okay, so now let's say I say to the attorney, hey, please let the judge know about this law and I need certain information. Now, the judge might did say, hey, no, you don't have the right to know that. I'm like, well, actually, I do, because I don't argue, right? But I know, like, yeah, I do. There's a law that says I do, and it's for the well-being of the child that is in your care state, you know. And so these things happen. That's why it's important to listen to people um, who are going to be more up on reading, who are right front line, have responsibility to care, and as a legal professional, not just disregard someone because they don't have a law degree. They have a different degree and they have a different expert knowledge in something that you don't. So it's not always that the quote unquote the magistrate or judge is right. However, it is the case that they would be in power of in that situation. So that's just something to think about. Okay. So um assessments. Now, in healthcare, people are always assessing. The professionals are always assessing. So I'm gonna just relate this to behavioral health assessments. Now, that's just one of an assessment. So when someone, let's say they're inpatient care, you first, there's something called a rule out. And this is something that I've seen more than one time, where whether it be an emergency medical staff or an EMS worker or inpatient, where for some reason, and I have my suspicions why, but for some reason, a thorough medical does not fully take place before one jumps to a mental health diagnosis. This is something that has to be changed. This is something that has to be changed. Now, mind you, I'm talking about all this in a fictitious system that is not sustainable. We are post Babylon. We are not babies. And so more of us are coming into what I call adulting, which is being responsible for our affairs and responsible for our estates, knowing full well that we have gained benefit from this system that we've gone in, whether it be fictitious system or as the living uh, natural person or the living people or what have you, right? So I'm saying this to say that it's not all bad. Now, there's some people have religious beliefs that it is all bad, right? But those, if you follow that logic model out, then some people feel like they have the right now to take someone else's life to for cleansing or renewing. And I say, whatever's going to happen, if it is to happen, it should not be at the hand of flawed man or woman. I use the term um, generically. Okay, so various assessments. So there could be problems with the kidneys filtering properly for various reasons. There could be problems with infections. Infections will cause dysfunction in your thoughts. That's what mental health, mentation, mental. AL is something that happens over and over and over, like um, scientifically, right? Your mentation. You can have problems with your mentation when you have an infection. That's very common in older people, right? So there are many treatments to treat um, infections, and then it's good to know how to prevent infections so that it's not a constant cycle because our bodies work perfectly when they're given what they need from the inside and from the outside. Most people don't. I think it's about 80% of the the diseases and conditions that people have are caused by their lifestyle. And I don't just mean eating, right? Because it's not all our fault. Some things are more difficult to address, environmental factors and things like that. So I don't say it in a dogmatic way. I'm just saying it is what it is. Okay, yes, activity is important. What we ingest is important. How we calm ourselves down is important, or excite ourselves. These things are all important and they contribute. And part of it is knowing, having the information and the foundation, which we have to reach for. We have to reach for that knowledge and that understanding because it's not a part of the curriculum that we're given. And many times it's not even part of the curriculum for healthcare professionals, right? So some, yes, but many times the curriculum is not designed to cure disease. It's not designed to cure disease. And we've had people come and tell us how to cure disease, right? Some of them have passed away now due to old age, or some of them have passed away due to circumstances. Okay. But that doesn't mean that it's not the truth. And now here we are in an age of truth and we're waking up to what is right. So there are countries who allow the meshing of pharmaceutical treatments with herbal treatments, right? So this is the age of knowledge. We have the internet. We can see what's going on. We don't have to pretend as if the systems here in the US cannot be improved upon. And I'm coming to you from outside that US jurisdiction. I do not claim that a citizen or a resident. I am an heir to this land here known as United States of America. Okay. So with that said, um, a psychosocial assessment is usually done by the therapist, and many times it's going to be a social worker. And it can be done by a lesser trained LCPC. Now, the LCPC might go on to a licensed clinical practical counselor, all right, or LCP, licensed counselor. They might go on, they might be educated 20, 30, 40 years. I cannot speak on the level of education overall, but I am going to speak on the level of formal education as you come into the field, right? So a social worker many times is going to have equivalent to at least 60 credits, where a counselor might have equivalent to 30 credits. And then a social worker, their curriculum, if they're licensed, they're going to have to also study certain materials so that they're able to pass the test, which is not everybody passes on the first time. Okay, so um, most healthcare settings require a license, which makes sense because then when you have people in even other backgrounds, let's say I've worked with a nurse who was in a leadership position at a mental health facility, and she'd done it for years, but she didn't know any of the current evidence-based practices to make her facility run properly, to manage it properly. She went on her feelings, and that's not something that is acceptable in the social work field. Whatever you say, you should have a reason, a theory, um, evidence-based practice. It should be based and rooted in um, fact, in what is proven historically to be correct for a good functioning, not what I think or what I feel. And I'm not saying that all professionals do that all the way, but I'm telling you the standard. Okay, now, so psychosocial assessment, a good one is going to tell you the trauma history. It's going to tell you who someone lives with, who is important to them. It's going to tell, are there any safety issues? Like, do you have a home? Well, of course it's not, do you have a home? But you're going to find out in that if there are housing needs, if there are needs, basic needs, but you're going to find out about trauma, and you're going to find out how that might play into whatever the presenting matter is at the time. You want to ask about a history of diagnosis, and then the situations around that diagnosis and what have you. Now, sometimes you use that information to feed your concept. It's not a reason or excuse to to just go with whatever the prior clinician diagnosed the the person with, the woman, man, in this case, the natural person. All right. But and then with those assessments, they can be stressful in itself. So at one time there was a push to try to make it so that you could get a clinician could get an assessment from someone else and not then charge the insurance company for a whole new assessment and that sort of thing. I don't know how that went, but this is something that one could be mindful of, because when someone talks about their history, it can be traumatizing. All right, so that's different from a psychological assessment. So let me just give you an example. If someone, let's say someone had a stroke January 1st, all right, you're not going to be doing a psychosocial assessment with them on, let's just say they had to be detained or not detained, they have to be sometimes it is detainment when people are not given the minimal environment available, right? But so let's just say they needed more inpatient care, right? The social worker should still try to put one together with the nearest family members or whoever the the individual is with, as far as living with, whoever that man or woman is living with. Um, or if they're not living with anyone, they might have a care manager. They might be, let's say they're homeless, but they have an agency that is helping them along. But see, that agency who's responsible to send workers out to help that person, that agency does not have guardianship over them per se. No, they might be the care, the link to the police, the link to the landlord. They could offer any number of services, but it's not the same thing as having guardianship. Still letting the rights be with that man or woman. Could be someone who has a severe mental illness, um, but they still have the right to make decisions for themselves. See, when we talk about guardianship, we're talking about a whole nother thing. And part of guardianship, the rights of that citizen, resident, are diminished. And that's the thing that really stands out with this whole piece is the diminishing of rights through guardianship. Now, what many of us don't know is already our rights are diminished at the receipt of the birth certificate. Okay. So that's something that many people aren't going to know until they have troubles and difficulties. But from talking to people, more and more people are having troubles and difficulties right now, right? Money's being moved from their accounts or credits, I'll say is a better term, but many people know it as money. All right. And it it's those credits and debits are representative of the floating rate note, and it floats because the interest rate goes up and down on it, the floating rate, and it's a note because it's really an IOU. All right. And once the estate is created, and let's say the social security number, if you were working out of the social security number that was assigned to your trade name, right? It's at that point, usually once you pass away, that the estate is I don't know what the right word is for that, so I'm not going to say, but it's a change in the status of the state. And it's at that time that the debts and credits are settled, and then there's no more note. And a note is indicative of, it's like an IOU, it's a loan, like a promissory note or a car note. It's a promise to pay, it's something in the future. So that's the floating rate note. And even the paper that we pass around, those are floating rate notes. And so they're really IOUs. It's not lawful money. Now, lawful money does not have the interest on it that comes around with the floating rate note. That's why the floating rate note floats. That's why the rate floats, because it's based on other instruments. Now, why am I talking about floating rate notes and guardianship? Because whoever is the guardian or responsible for your affairs and commerce is the one who controls the estate. And that's how the bank was like, oh my goodness, Wendy needs help. And I suppose that her estate is quite large. And based on what I see, she has not claimed her estate. And she's not, at no point was she considered legally competent. She has not demonstrated her competence. Yes, she's a talk show host. She's all this and that. So, yes, mentally, she was competent mentally, according to healthcare standards. But legally, she's never demonstrated her competence legally. Okay, and so this is where um, this is where rights come in too. So she, I didn't watch the whole docuseries, but when someone's drinking, when someone's not demonstrating mental health competency, that does not mean that then their right to their own lives is to be taken away, right? This is why due process is important. This is why due process is important. And this is why psychosocial assessments are important, because part of the psychosocial assessment would access someone's ability to even um, pay for services in their home in a least restrictive environment. So you might need a speech therapist, let's say an adult. You need a speech therapist, you need 24-hour supervision. There's certain people who are unsafe for you to be around. You don't have the mental ability to count your money. You don't, or if you have speech or communication problems, you might not be able to read well enough at any given time or calculate complex numbers. So just because you need help doing it, it doesn't mean that your rights to your own assets are to that those rights within that fictitious realm are to be terminated. And I'm saying this based on how this is done in other jurisdictions, as in the District of Columbia, which is really the seat of the federal regulations that overlap the states' rights. Okay. So the state might have the right to take her estate like that unclaimed. However, it's being done with a severe disregard to the federal standards for healthcare and all the licenses that are given on the state level, because those are based through the Department of Health and Human Service and the requirements that are set forth by them for the federal level. And so, if anyone, let's say a doctor, a nurse, or someone like that, all of the professionals have something called an NPI. It's called a National Provider Identifier, an NPI. See, so they're not just on their own making up things. There is a federal standard. So with licenses, there are cons to the license, especially when a state decides to create a statute, a code, or rule that goes against someone's God given right. Let's say to think, or to work a position that does not require their license to think that they have overriding jurisdiction to tell that person whether to think or not. I have found that there are laws that indicate that there was something in place where there's, you don't have the right to think. These are religious and ecclesiastical statements or claims. So, but the good thing about having that um, level of oversight is that in some ways, the standards are there, so you can't harm people in a certain way without the whole world knowing about it, right? So it's when due process is ignored, when there is no due process, that we have problems. And the reason why we have to speak on it now is because since Babylon has fallen, there are people who know nothing about healthcare, and that is the gateway into this fictitious system. And they're making decisions on people's healthcare. They're a banker. They're a banker talking about, oh, they're not competent. Well, guess what? Legally, they were never competent. You didn't say that when they were pouring credits into your institution, your public institution. You didn't say that they weren't legally competent then. And you definitely don't have the training to know if they're mentally competent to be able to have their own lives. Now, here's the thing. There's a claim of us being collateral for the debt, being collateral for the accounts. And that collateral piece is not made known to us. And this is something that has to change. This is something that has become abusive, and people's fear of what's happening in the market and the banking and the economy. The people in these roles are now using these laws, and they're not even fully applying all the things in the Federal Reserve circulars. For the ones who are waking up and want to settle the debt and come out of it, they're not using the proper strategies that are there to shift the system in the right direction. So we could go deep into this. We'll talk about it another time. But as far as what you call yourself matters. Now, an African American person, based on what I see, obviously does not have rights to communicate with their family. Now, someone who is a people and they operate in commerce as a people with their full rights, yes, they have all sorts of rights. And these rights are acknowledged in the Declaration of the Organization of American States. These rights are also acknowledged in the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. This is by the UN. So the UN and the Organization of American States, both of these organizations, the people have made declarations as to the rights of Indigenous people. But hear me, people and persons are not the same. And legal, a corporation can be a person, a trust can be a person. Then we also have in commerce natural persons. All right. We have natural persons. And then we also have people who claim their estates as whether it be executor, administrator, or fiduciary. Those words don't all mean the same. But I'm just using this as an example to say there's a difference between me going out in commerce with debt and bonds on my back and me standing up to say, hey, I'm a woman and I'm going to use the role as fiduciary to manage an estate, my own affairs. So for Wendy, now what needs to happen is someone who can come into that role and claim her estate for her and claim her rights and stand up for her rights. And another thing, it's important that we all learn how to do this. Now, and also, I guess in the meantime, in between time, until she is free, her loved ones could, for her, hire someone private who does not have a gain from working with the state. There are people who can work in that role who do not actually have oaths to the bar. And then there are also people who might have an oath to the bar in the state, but if you pay them right, that they have a private practice, they can still work with your loved one's best interest to protect and help them with this state. And it is part of her rights to hire someone who has her best interest at heart versus the state. That's her right. And just for the record, on the SF-171, if you were to Google that, you will notice that in the categories, the fictitious categories in the fictitious realm, that the Black/African Americans are the only ones that don't have people in the description. Because people are living and breathing, and then people, they have a fictitious entity that they kind of put on as a mask to go out into commerce. And so Wendy was probably working under the parents' patria rule, in which case it is appropriate that Letitia James speak to why there's no one who's making sure that she has her visits. Even a child in foster care has regular visits with their loved ones, except for if it's proven that their loved ones, just a conversation with their loved ones would be emotionally harmful or disruptive. All right. These are the situations where it would be acceptable for someone who is under the guardianship. Now, when you're a guardian, that means you take the responsibility to make sure that literally that man or woman is okay, because it's upon their lives that the estate that you're trying to control depends. So if the estate depends on their lives, wouldn't it be appropriate to care for them? Or is it just appropriate to hold them like off to the side, make sure that they don't die? Mm, I think we know the answer to that, because we are talking about righteousness. We are talking about morals and ethics. Because what's the result if we don't talk about it? So I just want to contribute to that a little bit. Let's see. Why we want to address this is because the Wendy's of the world, the women who are here at the United States of North America, they've been labeled Black, they've been labeled African American as legal terms, as labels. And someone might look at her and say that that's okay, that's what she is. She might even call herself that. But a label is actually a fictitious construct. Okay. She has eyes, nose, ears, mouth, she breathes. She's a people. Okay. And she also, and more accurately, is an heir. She's an heir to the world's largest state on the ancestral lands known as United States of North America. Okay, so if we're going to label people, we want to label them accurately in this day and time. And this is why it's so apparent to us that this is not right. And if she needs something, it's not the case that an attorney who is not indigenous to here is going to know better for her what she needs than anyone else. That's not the case. And so I want to go on the record by saying that, and knowing that as I learn how to properly claim my estate and rebut the many lies and many, because they really are lies, that and it's just people in the role of the trustees of the trust, because our estates are held in trust, right? So the trustees who are responsible for it, yes, the attorneys, the governors, they're responsible um, for to preserve our estates until we stand up and claim them. And but what's happening is they've been putting themselves in the beneficiary role because we have not stood up for them. And some of the reasons that we have not stood up for them, part of it is because of the military, the Department of Defense, the Department of Treasury actions against us. Some of those actions then have an impact on our spiritual health, on what is knowing what is true, because we're educated with incorrect information and we're made to believe things that are not correct. And so then we put that all together and we're engineered to not stand up. Okay. Um, but that doesn't mean that that's right, and now we need to move into telling more truth. And for those who don't know the truth, hopefully these conversations will be more prevalent so that people don't have to stand up there and be convicted of wrong information. At first, it's just a mistake. And then when someone keeps going on and on and on with something, they ignore something, then it starts to become a delusion. And so you can have a high level of a degree and still be walking in a delusion. Yes, and we have to think about it. This has been going on for hundreds of years. So for some people, it's really difficult to make the shift. And I'm dealing with some things now that are on the public record. And all of it, in my opinion, has to do with maybe some proclaimed religious rights and some more stuff. Because when I look at the rules and the laws and I see the provisions that have been made during a time that people will wake up and recognize who they are, and then those who have been the trustees and in some cases, in many cases, oppressing the heirs, oppressing the beneficiaries, oppressing the heirs, there's a path to flip the switch and move things the other way. But they don't see that written down in black and white. Now it's almost equivalent to Alice standing up at the end. There are two versions at least that I've seen of Alice in Wonderland. And one version at the court scene at the end, she takes this potion and it makes her bigger, right? Another version, she just automatically starts to get bigger, where she's standing up over the court, and saying what's right or wrong. Now, that's what I think the charge is for the heirs to the land at North America. That's what our charge is to do, is to stand up. But imagine in that final scene when she stands up, and as she's starting to get like a little bit bigger, they throw a gavel at her forehead, or they throw a light fixture at her. Like, okay, she's recognizing who she is and she's trying to speak the truth. And because they she didn't speak the truth in the way they thought she should speak the truth, or it wasn't acceptable, they just start throwing all these tools and instruments at Alice as she starts to stand up and rise over the court. Now, Alice was fine before. Alice walked into the room. She didn't come in a wheelchair. She didn't come with a disability. She got in the room. She could walk and talk and speak. But then they treat her in such a way, throw all these tools at her, and now she's like physically disabled and can't even get out the courtroom because she's all of a sudden not able to carry herself anymore. Imagine that. That's where we are right now in the movie, in my opinion. Especially in a situation, let's say, look at Wendy, right? I haven't heard them say anything about any of the treatments that are known to reverse what she's going through. So that's my concern about her. Yes, yes. She had some lifestyle things that contributed to her situation. That's usually the case with dementia. That's usually the case. But they didn't speak of any of the natural things, any of the things within her bloodline root ancestry that would be used to heal her. And that's actually called neglect. It's a form of maltreatment called neglect. So for them to control her funds and not maximize every day to restore her in the public, because you're in the public saying what she did wrong, you're blaming the victim, someone who's not even fully educated about how to take care of herself, and you're not educating her based on what you're putting out in the media. So these are just things that we want to consider. All right. um, and one of the cons is when we label people, right? We want to label someone, this highly successful black woman from New Jersey. No, she's an heir. She's an heir to North America. And there is a reversionary interest in her estate that she is due, and someone is using that. And I'm not seeing that her children her child. I'm not sure how many children. I think she has just the one. I don't know, but her loved ones, her kin, her village, they need her, and they in their proper standing. Whether no matter what they call themselves, they could call themselves anything they want. They actually have a right. It's just that they need to learn to claim it, and to think that it's justified if somebody calls himself the wrong thing, that it's okay for another to walk over them or take advantage of them because of their lack of knowledge. That's an abusive relationship right there. So, and that has to change. All right, so that's why I'm speaking on that. And it only takes a spark to get things going. I will keep speaking, I will keep learning. I will, um, I'll move forward. And the one who has that, is in that role, they have a responsibility to, it's not just to control her estate or her money, because it's on her life that the estate depends. And this is 2024, and we are awakening. And so now it's a good time to check yourself. If you're in that situation as an attorney and you have no background in the provision of healthcare services, and it's already documented from like 20 years ago about the the degradation of the services. So if you don't have a history on the problem with the healthcare field, what you would do to fix the healthcare field, you're not in a position to come and explain the healthcare field to other people, especially when I don't hear anybody from her circle talking about they have regular visits and here's what it's about. Especially if you know the lady has um, a problem with her communication, then these are things that she should be offered these things and see how she responds to it. And a health plan is not done once a year. A health plan is probably, depending on the level of care that she's in, it really should be done every day. We're assessing today, is she good enough to go home? Today, have we put the things in place for her to go home? Today, have we done that? Now, you do that in the public health system with people who don't have any money. You're trying to send them out right away before they're even ready. But in her situation, we're not going to hear back for a year from the last trial. Come on now. We're going to do this. It's going to be all right. All right. So we're just transitioning, waking up, acting as adults. There is a difference between legal competence and mental health competence. Okay, I demonstrated that. You can go through all your life and you have actually been deemed legally incompetent, as evidenced by now you're under guardianship, wardship status, and you just didn't know it because it's different. All right, mental health competence, and they do interplay because it's not, it doesn't even make sense that people would go back and forth between, oh yes, now you're bringing us plenty of money, so you're mentally competent. Now all of a sudden, oh, our money's not coming in, our credits are not coming in the way we want. Oh, we think that you're, you know, you're mentally incompetent and you're legally incompetent. Like, that's not consistent. Whoever's making these arguments, I'm wondering, are they mentally competent? Because they're not logical and everyone sees what's wrong with it. The parental rights, true or false, can parental rights be terminated at any time? In a ethical, organized setting, no. Due process, you would go through a due process, evaluations, multiple levels to terminate some, even when a parent, let's say, has a child removed due to reports and substantiation, investigation and substantiation. That's the next thing we'll talk about. The FBI and their reports, investigation, substantiation. before they start targeting people. We'll talk about that next time. Okay, but the way it happens in child and adult um, protective service, the way that happens is that um, there's an investigation. You get all the details. You consider the fact that someone is may have an enemy in the neighborhood. People do that all the time. They didn't like something their neighbor did. Now, the bank does that all the time too. Oh, we don't like what's happening with their account. I'll call Adult Protective Service and do a report. I mean, so what? The older confused person is unhappy, but that doesn't mean necessarily that the person caring for them is wrong. Okay, so you don't know what is happening in the background. You don't know what kind of monies are being exchanged back and forth, whatever. So you call Adult Protective Service. That's fine. Adult Protective Service, Child Protective Service, they get the report. They supposed to have trained people. Some states have trained people that are licensed, have a higher standard. Some people have unlicensed folks who don't have that higher standard. But either way, there should be someone who is skilled to know whether or not this meets the threshold of of whether it's abuse or maltreatment. It might not be what you like, but it doesn't mean it's abuse or maltreatment. Okay, so let's just say it is abuse and maltreatment, and in that relationship there has to be some intervention. It doesn't mean that the rights to interact to terminated. That is another legal process. It's another legal process. So that's ridiculous that whether you're talking about in the don't have access to her. Okay. Let me see here. Psychoassessment and psychological assessment are not the same thing. So the question was false. They're not the same thing. So parental rights can be determined. All right, so false. And the psychosocial assessment, they at the core should be the same. At the core should be the same. It might be, the same questions about drug use, addiction, and all these kind of things because you can't assess someone properly if they're high at the time or the effects of the drugs are still on them. You can't assess somebody with certain conditions, not even a mental health diagnosis if they're under the influence. One before the other. You can't see someone's high and be like, oh, they have mental health problems. You don't know if they have mental health diagnosis or not because they're high. You cannot tell that when they're high. You cannot tell that if there's another medical condition. All right, so psychosocial assessment should be pretty standard. All right. Then you have a number of different psychological assessments for different settings. Now, let's just say one that would diagnose even one, let's say someone had a stroke or even with alcoholism or something like that. You wouldn't want to diagnose certain diseases. Well, I don't hear Wendy being diagnosed with a severe mental illness, so that's good. They didn't do that. But even with the dementia symptoms, it's more appropriate to wait about a year after the person is as stable as they're gonna get, for a year out. There are certain psychologists who will not do various because that's not the standard of care. You have to wait 1 year to make sure that it is just that. You get a good idea. It's not the spillover health condition or the spillover of their substance use. Okay, so and then they have psychoeducational assessments. They have them for dementia, as far as like Alzheimer's. They have, so that has happened. That's why there's so many misdiagnoses, because the clinicians don't know what they're doing. Any clinician, including a doctor, who would diagnose, let's say somebody came in and the loved one is saying, oh, they took care of themselves, they did all these great things for themselves. How are you going to diagnose them with Alzheimer's after they had stroke, after they have Alzheimer's? What in the world? That doesn't make sense. This is why you have to have your social worker talk to the people around the person as well. And I know that this happens, and then some doctors are arrogant, and that's why they should get sued. Okay. African American persons have a right to their to communicate with their family. Well, obviously not, because that's the status that um, Wendy has accepted, and her family has accepted. They have not claimed their right as people indigenous to this land, who have a right to their kin and to their village. Okay? Person and people, not the same. All right. And we talked about the Organization of American States and the United Nations. And it's not a law, but it is a declaration. And I say it loosely when I say it's not a law, because we're going to make it a law. We're going to make it a law that that's how we're to be treated on this land. We have the right to our own bodies. We have the right to our own land. I've declared this before, however, it seems to be the case that some think one should earn the right to not be abused. One should earn the right to not be mistreated. And I disagree. A label is an abstract in sociology used to group people, and it's based in a perceived or a held identity. See, so African American, Black, that's a label. That's a label. All right. And that's how, let me go to the next question. The next question is, what is one con of a label? The con is it can cause harm when used to separate individuals from groups or from mainstream society. Do you think that maybe this label of you're, oh, just a Black citizen with a lot of funds, do you think that maybe that label is being used to separate the living, breathing, sentient women from those who want to be in contact with her, who want to check, to do a safety check? They need her as much as she needs them. Maybe not all of them, maybe not all the time, but I wonder if this is being used, and it might not be in Wendy's full best interest. And as a guardian, then if that's the claim that you're making, that you've come in to do things on her full and best interest as a ward of the jurisdiction, then we have to do what we're going to say. You can't have the benefit of her estate without making sure that her full and best interests are not provided. All right. Thank you for listening, and be well, and peace be unto you.